The theft of the Emerald Harp. It was a raw November evening in the year 1895, when the fog hung so thick over London that the gas lamps in Baker Street seemed no more than dim halos struggling against the damp. I had just returned from a tiresome day at my practice, my boots still wet from the crossing of Regent's Circus, when I found Sherlock Holmes seated by the fire in our old sitting room at 221B. He was in one of his contemplative moods, his long legs stretched out, his violin across his lap, plucking idly at the strings as though teasing some elusive melody from the instrument. "A dull day, Watson?" he asked without looking up. "Thoroughly so," I replied, hanging my coat by the door. "A succession of coughs, sprains, and imaginary ailments. But you, Holmes, you seem restless." He gave a short laugh. Restless, perhaps. The criminal classes have been lamentably inactive of late. Even the newspapers offer nothing but the usual parliamentary squabbles over this Irish Home Rule business. He gestured toward a scattered pile of journals on the table. "Yet tonight, at least, there is music." "Music?" I echoed. For Holmes's interest in concerts was rare, unless they concealed some deeper puzzle. "Miss Evelyn O'Connor," he said, rising and laying the violin in its case. "An Irish harpist of extraordinary reputation. She performs this evening at St. James's Hall, and the centerpiece of her recital is a family heirloom known as the Emerald Harp, an instrument said to be centuries old, its pillar and sound box studded with emeralds that catch the light like drops of dew on shamrock. The program promises not only classical airs, but traditional Gaelic melodies handed down since the days of Brian Boru himself." I confess I was surprised. "You intend to attend a concert, Holmes?" "I intend," he said with a faint smile, "to observe humanity in one of its more refined attitudes. Besides, Lestrade mentioned in passing that certain Irish societies in London have taken a keen interest in the harp's appearance here. Sentiment, politics, and priceless gems, an intriguing combination." Thus it was that, an hour later, we found ourselves seated among the fashionable crowd in the warmly lit auditorium of St. James's Hall. The air was alive with anticipation. Ladies in silk rustled their programs, and gentlemen murmured of the performer's beauty and skill. When the curtain rose, Miss Evelyn O'Connor stepped forward, a striking figure in a gown of deep green velvet, her dark hair bound with a simple silver fillet. She moved with quiet dignity to the instrument that stood alone upon the stage. The Emerald Harp was indeed a thing of beauty. Even from our seats in the circle I could see the gleam of gold wire upon its four-pillar, the rich carving of interlacing knots, and, most arresting of all, the emeralds that flashed from its neck and sound box, stones of a deep and vivid green that seemed to hold the very essence of the land they called the Emerald Isle. Legend, as the program informed us, claimed that when played by one of true Gaelic blood, the harp would sometimes add notes of its own, as though the spirits of ancient bards still lingered in its strings. Miss O'Connor seated herself, her hands, slender yet strong, poised above the wires. For a moment the hall was utterly silent. Then the first notes rang out, clear and silvery, filling the space with a haunting air that seemed to carry the listener across misty hills and beside rushing streams. She played a stately arrangement of Carolan's works, followed by livelier jigs that set toes tapping throughout the audience. Yet it was in the slower, older melodies that her mastery shone brightest. The final piece, an ancient lament said to have been composed for a fallen high king, held us spellbound. As the last note died away, I fancied, as did many others, that a faint additional harmonic lingered in the air, a soft after-echo that no human fingers had plucked. The applause was thunderous. Miss O'Connor rose, bowed gracefully, and withdrew. The audience began to stir, gathering gloves and programs, preparing for the interval. Little did any of us suspect that before the night was out, the Emerald Harp would vanish as completely as the echoes of its final chord, and that Sherlock Holmes would once more be drawn into a tangle of mystery, motive, and ancient Celtic fire. The applause had scarcely died away when the audience began to disperse for the interval, streaming toward the refreshment rooms in a murmur of admiration and excitement. Sherlock Holmes and I lingered a moment in our seats, for my friend was in no haste to join the crush. "A remarkable performance, Watson," he remarked, his eyes still fixed upon the stage where the Emerald Harp stood alone beneath the gaslights. "The lady's technique is flawless, yet it is the instrument itself that commands attention. Note the proportions, classic medieval Irish design, yet the emeralds are cut in a fashion more suggestive of later workmanship. Curious." I was about to reply when a sudden commotion arose backstage. Raised voices, the hurried tread of feet, and then a woman's cry of unmistakable anguish. Holmes was on his feet in an instant. "Come, Watson, something is amiss." We made our way swiftly down the side aisle and through a door marked "Private," guided by the growing tumult. In a small anteroom behind the stage, we found Miss Eileen O'Connor standing pale and trembling before a handsome glass display case that had been placed there for the reception of distinguished patrons. The case was empty. The Emerald Harp was gone. Around her clustered a knot of anxious figures, the hall manager wringing his hands, 2 constables who had been summoned from the street, and several fashionable guests who had been invited to view the instrument at close quarters. Upon the floor lay a single white glove, evidently dropped in haste. "It was here not 10 minutes ago," Miss O'Connor exclaimed, her voice shaking with emotion. "I left it myself after the performance, locked the case with my own key, and joined the guests in the adjoining salon. When I returned just now to prepare for the second half, this." The manager, a portly gentleman with a harassed expression, confirmed her words. "The case was specially constructed, Mr. Holmes. Thick glass, brass lock of the finest make. No sign of forcible entry. The key has never left Miss O'Connor's possession." Holmes knelt beside the case, his lens already in his hand. For several minutes he examined the lock, the hinges, the floor around it, even the velvet cushion that had borne the harp's weight. At length he rose, his expression grave. "No fracture of the glass, no scratches upon the brass," he murmured. "Yet the harp has vanished as completely as though it dissolved into air. Tell me, Miss O'Connor, did anyone express particular interest in examining the instrument alone?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "Many admired it, but all in my presence or that of the attendants, except—" Her eyes widened. "Just before the interval, I thought I heard a faint strain of music from this room, as though someone had lightly touched the strings. I assumed it was one of the stage hands adjusting the stand and paid it no mind." Holmes's gaze sharpened. "Music, you say? At what hour precisely?" "Perhaps 12 minutes past 10, the manager supplied, consulting his watch against the hall clock. A constable cleared his throat. "Begging your pardon, sir, but several persons in the corridor reported hearing a similar sound later. Near midnight, soft and eerie, like a harp played by no living hand." I felt a slight chill at these words, but Holmes merely smiled thinly. "Ghostly minstrels in St. James's Hall. We shall see. Watson, note the faint residue upon the lock. Rosin, undoubtedly, but of an unusual fragrance. Peat smoke, I fancy, mingled with the usual pine." Miss O'Connor, who had been listening intently, now stepped forward. "Mr. Holmes, I have heard of your extraordinary gifts. This harp is not merely valuable. It is the last relic of my family's ancient line, carried from Ireland through centuries of turmoil. If it is lost—" Her voice broke. Holmes inclined his head. "It shall not be lost, madam, if human ingenuity can prevent it. I shall take the case. Pray return to your guests and complete your recital if you feel able. I would not have the public alarmed prematurely. Tomorrow morning come to Baker Street with every detail you can recall of those who approached the harp this evening." As we emerged into the fog once more, Holmes was silent for some time, his hands thrust deep into the pockets of his ulster. At last he spoke. A locked case, an impossible disappearance, and the suggestion of spectral music, all designed to bewilder. Yet beneath the theatrical trappings, Watson, lies a very human criminal. The game, I think, has begun. The following morning dawned cold and grey, with a drizzle that streaked the windows of 221B Baker Street. Sherlock Holmes was already at work when I descended to breakfast, surrounded by newspapers, a magnifying lens, and a small pile of rosin fragments he had carefully scraped from the display case the night before. Miss Evelyn O'Connor arrived promptly at 10 o'clock, accompanied by the hall manager, Mr. Fairchild, who carried a sheaf of papers detailing the evening's guest list. She was pale but composed, her green cloak still bearing a few raindrops from the street. "I have compiled every name I can recall," she said, handing Holmes a neatly written list. Many were patrons of the arts, but 4 stood out for their particular interest in the harp. Holmes scanned the page with a swift glance. "Excellent. Let us begin with these. Watson, pray fetch your notebook." The first name was that of Professor Reginald Hargrove, a noted composer and critic whose reviews appeared regularly in the musical press. We found him in his chambers near the British Museum, a tall, angular man with a neatly trimmed beard and an air of condescension. "I admired the instrument naturally," he admitted when Holmes broached the subject. "A fine example of Celtic barbarism dressed in pretty stones. Yet I scarcely approached it. Irish folk airs are picturesque, but they lack the sophistication of true composition." His tone carried a faint sneer as he spoke of superstitious Gaelic nonsense. Holmes's eyes narrowed slightly. "You wrote, I believe, only last month that such relics should remain in museums rather than be paraded for sentimental effect." Hargrove shrugged. "Precisely, they inflame nationalist passions better left dormant." We took our leave none the wiser, save for a lingering impression of disdain. Next came Mr. Declan Murphy, a prosperous merchant and outspoken advocate of Home Rule, whose offices lay in the Irish district near the docks. He received us warmly, his broad face lighting with enthusiasm as he spoke of the harp. "A treasure of our people, Mr. Holmes. To see it in English hands, even temporarily fair, broke my heart. I begged Miss O'Connor to consider exhibiting it in Dublin instead, where it belongs. If some patriot has taken it back." He spread his hands expressively, neither confirming nor denying the possibility. "And you were alone with the instrument at any point?" Holmes asked mildly. "Only for a moment, to examine the carving, but I swear I left it untouched." From Murphy's premises we proceeded to a narrower quarter of the city where Mr. Silas Blackwood kept a discreet pawn shop in a side street off Portobello Road. The windows were crowded with watches, rings, and musical instruments of every description. Blackwood himself was a small, sharp-featured man with restless eyes. "Ancient harps, emeralds." He laughed softly. "I hear of many things in my trade, gentlemen, but nothing of that sort has passed my door. Though if it had, I'd know its value. Emeralds of that size fetch a pretty penny, provenance or no." Holmes lingered over a tray of jeweller's tools, noting the fine files and pincers. "You deal in antiquities, then?" "When they come my way," Blackwood replied smoothly. "But I keep within the law, sir, always." As we departed, I remarked to Holmes that none of the 3 had struck me as particularly guilty. "Guilt often wears the mask of innocence, Watson," he replied, "yet each has a motive. Hargrove's cultural contempt, Murphy's political zeal, Blackwood's greed. And we must not overlook Miss O'Connor herself. Her family debts are considerable, and a theft might answer an insurance claim admirably. I protested at this, but Holmes only smiled. We eliminate no one until the evidence demands it. That evening, as we sat before the fire, Holmes arranged the suspects' names on the mantelpiece with pins and thread, forming a small web of connections. Observe, Watson. Hargrove reviewed Miss O'Connor's previous London recital unfavourably. Murphy contributed generously to her tour, yet pressed her on nationalist causes. Blackwood sold her the very display case in which the harp was locked. All threads lead back to the lady and her instrument. He leaned back, filling his pipe. Tomorrow we shall examine physical traces more closely. For now, note this. The rosin on the lock is not the common sort used in London orchestras, but a coarser blend scented distinctly with peat, imported, I suspect, from Dublin itself. Someone with Irish connections handled that lock very recently indeed. For the next 2 days, Baker Street became a laboratory. Sherlock Holmes, in his old dressing gown, moved restlessly between the chemical table, the microscope, and a large sheet of foolscap pinned to the wall upon which he had sketched the layout of St. James's Hall with every door, corridor, and window carefully marked. I found him at dawn on the second morning bent over a shallow dish in which fragments of the rosin from the display case lock were dissolving in alcohol. "Peat, Watson," he announced triumphantly, holding the dish to the light. "Not the faint suggestion I first detected, but unmistakable. This rosin is compounded with turf smoke in the Irish manner, and the grains of embedded vegetable matter are those of sphagnum moss from the western bogs. It is imported in small quantities by only 3 firms in London, all of whom supply Irish musicians resident here. Our thief, or his accomplice, either plays the harp himself or has close connection with one who does." He then turned to a small clockwork mechanism he had constructed overnight, a delicate arrangement of wire and cork that, when placed near taut strings, could set them vibrating at a distance by means of a timed release. "Thus the ghostly music reported near midnight," he explained, "a simple device concealed behind the wainscot activated by a length of black thread. Child's play to a clever mechanician. Later that morning we visited a jeweller in Hatton Garden to whom Holmes had sent certain emerald fragments scraped from the velvet cushion of the case. The report was illuminating. The stones are genuine enough, the man told us, but their cutting is modern. 19th century work, not earlier, and several show traces of recent resetting. Whoever mounted them did so within the last decade." Holmes received this news with evident satisfaction. "The plot thickens, Watson. An ancient harp adorned with modern stones, an intriguing discrepancy." That afternoon he dispatched a telegram to Dublin and spent hours poring over photographs of the harp taken before its London tour. Under the lens he detected faint tool marks upon the metal strings, marks consistent with modern steel wire rather than the gut traditionally used in ancient instruments. "Observe," he said, passing me the glass. "These are not the strings of Brian Boru's time. They are drawn in a Sheffield mill, and not 5 years old." I confess I was baffled. "Then the entire harp is a forgery?" "Not entirely," Holmes replied. "The wooden frame shows genuine age, perhaps 4 or 5 centuries, but the ornamentation, the emeralds, the wire, all modern additions. Our Emerald Harp is a clever reconstruction, a pastiche designed to appear ancient while concealing more recent craftsmanship." He leaned back, steepling his fingers. "Now consider the hidden compartment. Every traditional Irish harp of the old pattern possesses a hollow pillar for resonance, and often a secret cavity. I have examined the photographs closely. There is a seam, almost invisible, just above the carving of the interlaced beasts. Something was concealed there, Watson, something the thief particularly desired. That evening, Miss O'Connor called again, bringing with her a small leather-bound volume of family papers. Among them was a letter from her late father mentioning that the harp had been restored and enriched after the troubles of '48, with certain additions for safety. Holmes's eyes gleamed. Additions for safety. A compartment, then, in which papers or small valuables might be hidden. Tell me, madam, were any documents of political or personal importance entrusted to the harp in recent years? She hesitated, then nodded slowly. My brother, before he emigrated to America, placed certain correspondence there, letters connected with the Land League. He feared searches, but they were removed years ago, or so I believed. Holmes sprang to his feet. Then the motive becomes clearer. Someone learned of that compartment and believed it still contained material worth stealing or worth suppressing. The emeralds are valuable, certainly, but the true prize lies within the pillar. He paced the room rapidly. Hargrove, with his contempt for Irish claims, might wish to expose or destroy such documents. Murphy might seek to recover them for his cause. Blackwood would sell anything to the highest bidder, but only one among them possesses both the technical skill to open the lock without damage and the knowledge of Irish rosin and modern jeweller's work. I waited, but he said no more, merely filled his pipe and stared into the fire, his mind racing far ahead of mine along paths I could not yet discern. The following day brought a development that seemed, at first, to plunge the case into deeper obscurity. A note was delivered to Miss O'Connor at her lodgings in Bloomsbury, written in a flowing hand upon paper, watermarked with a Celtic knot, and it read, "The harp sings once more in its true home. Seek it not, lest the old curse fall upon the seeker. The fairies reclaim what was stolen from the cedar." Enclosed with the note was a single emerald, unmistakably one of those that had adorned the instrument. Miss O'Connor brought it at once to Baker Street, her face pale with alarm. "Mr. Holmes, I have heard tales of the Doyne cedar since childhood. My grandmother swore that an ancestor took the harp from a fairy mound and that it would one day be reclaimed. Could this be?" Holmes examined the stone with his lens, then placed it beneath the microscope. "A pretty superstition, madam, but this emerald bears the same modern facets we noted before. Your fairies appear to employ a Hatton garden cutter." Yet he took the note seriously enough to accompany Miss O'Connor that very evening to Hyde Park, where the message had hinted that moonlight upon the Serpentine would reveal a sign. We waited in the chill darkness near the water until nearly midnight, when a faint sound, undoubtedly that of harp strings lightly brushed, seemed to float across the lake. A small boat drifted into view, and upon its seat lay what appeared to be the missing instrument gleaming softly in the moonlight. I started forward eagerly, but Holmes restrained me. "Steady, Watson. Observe the proportions. Even at this distance the pillar seems too slender. A decoy." We summoned constables, and the boat was brought to shore. The harp proved to be a crude wooden mock-up wrapped in green silk, its emeralds nothing but coloured glass. "A deliberate red herring," Holmes muttered as we returned through the fog. "Designed to waste our time and lend credence to the supernatural theory. Someone wishes us to believe in curses and fairy folk." The next morning brought a second complication. Mr. Declan Murphy arrived at Baker Street in a state of great agitation, accompanied by a solicitor. He confessed that his alibi for the hour of the theft was imperfect. He had indeed left the reception briefly to meet a friend in the corridor, but would say no more without legal advice. "Mr. Holmes," he said earnestly, I swear I took nothing, but I cannot fully account for those minutes. If the harp was removed then, I fear suspicion must fall upon me. Holmes questioned him closely, and at length Murphy admitted that he had been shielding Miss O'Connor herself. She stepped away for a moment to speak with a stage hand, nothing more. But in these troubled times, any Irish name draws scrutiny. This revelation turned my thoughts once more toward the harpist. Could she have arranged the theft for insurance using the nationalist note as misdirection? Holmes, however, was pursuing another line. He had spent the previous night examining ledgers obtained from the hall's suppliers and from Blackwood's shop. Among them he discovered an invoice for the very display case, paid not by Miss O'Connor, but by Professor Hargrove, under the pretext of patronage of the arts. Curious, Holmes remarked, laying the paper before me. Why should a man who scorns Irish music anonymously fund the case in which the harp was shown? That afternoon we returned to Hargrove's chambers unannounced. The professor was at his desk, surrounded by sketches of musical scores and several small wooden models of harp pillars. Holmes's keen eye noted immediately that one model bore a concealed sliding panel, precisely the sort of compartment he had deduced in the Emerald Harp. Hargrove paled when confronted with the invoice. "A mere act of generosity," he stammered. "I wish the instrument displayed securely." "Generosity?" Holmes echoed softly. "Or opportunity? You knew the harp's construction intimately, perhaps because you had a hand in its restoration. Tell me, Professor, how many other ancient Irish instruments have you enriched with modern emeralds and steel wire, then sold to credulous collectors as relics of Brian Boru?" Hargrove's composure cracked. "Preposterous. I am a composer, not a forger." "Yet your models betray you," Holmes continued inexorably, "and the rosin upon the lock matches a cake I observed upon your mantel. Dublin peat blend, purchased from the same importer who supplies Miss O'Connor." The professor sank into his chair, but still protested innocence of the theft itself. "I may have advised on certain restorations, but I did not steal the harp." As we left, Holmes was quieter than usual. "He speaks truth on one point, Watson. He did not remove the harp from the case. The forger would not risk exposing his own deception by theft. No, the thief sought to profit from Hargrove's handiwork, or to conceal it. We are closing in. But one final piece eludes me." That night, as the clock struck 11, Holmes suddenly sprang from his chair. "The compartment, Watson. If documents were once hidden there, the thief may have believed they remained. But suppose the real object was not political papers, but proof of the forgery itself, proof that would ruin the man who created the illusion." His eyes blazed with the old excitement. "Come. We pay a final visit to Mr. Silas Blackwood. The curtain is about to rise on the last act." The fog lay thicker than ever as our cab rattled through the narrow streets toward Portobello Road. It was past 10 o'clock, and the pawn shop of Mr. Silas Blackwood was officially closed. Yet a faint gleam of light showed beneath the shutters. Holmes paid off the driver a street away and motioned me to follow silently. We approached the shop by a side alley, where a narrow door stood ajar. From within came the unmistakable sound of harp strings being lightly tuned, soft silvery notes that hung in the damp air like a spell. Holmes smiled grimly. "Our bird is within, Watson, and he has brought the harp to roost." We slipped inside. The shop was dimly lit by a single gas jet turned low, throwing long shadows among the crowded shelves of watches, violins, and silver plate. At the far end behind the counter stood Professor Hargrove, his back to us, bending over the Emerald Harp which lay upon a baize-covered table. Silas Blackwood hovered nearby, rubbing his hands nervously, while two rough-looking assistants lounged against the wall. Hargrove was fitting a small key into the pillar of the harp, turning it with infinite care. As we watched, a narrow panel slid open, revealing a shallow cavity within. From it he drew a folded paper, yellowed with age, yet bearing fresh ink marks. "Proof," he muttered exultantly. "Bills of sale, sketches, the jeweller's receipts, everything that would expose the restorations as modern work. With this destroyed, the harp remains a priceless ancient relic, and my reputation as its scholarly guardian is secure." Blackwood leaned closer. "And my share of the sale to that American collector?" "Generous, as agreed," Hargrove replied. "Once the emeralds are removed and the wood aged a little more, it will fetch 20,000 guineas. Holmes stepped forward into the light. "A handsome profit, gentlemen, upon a forgery of your own creation, Professor." Hargrove spun round, his face livid. Blackwood gave a startled oath, and the two assistants reached inside their coats. "Steady, Watson," Holmes murmured, his hand in his pocket. I levelled my old service revolver. "I should advise against any rashness." The assistants froze. Blackwood's sharp features worked with fear, but Hargrove drew himself up defiantly. "You cannot prove—" "On the contrary," Holmes interrupted, advancing to the table. "I can prove everything. The rosin upon the lock came from your own cake, Professor. The peat-scented blend you favour because it reminds you of childhood summers in Connemara. The clockwork device that produced the ghostly music matches the one you constructed for your mechanical opera experiments. Lestrade has already recovered it from the wainscot at St. James's Hall. The invoice for the display case bears your disguised signature, and the emerald sent to Miss O'Connor with the fairy note was cut by the very Hatton Garden firm whose receipt you now hold." He picked up the folded paper and unfolded it calmly. "These documents confirm that you restored the harp 10 years ago, replacing decayed wood, adding modern wire and setting new emeralds to enhance its value. Then forged provenance to pass it off as a relic of the 11th century. You arranged its display in London to attract buyers, but feared Miss O'Connor's growing suspicion, or her brother's old political letters, still rumoured to be hidden within, might expose you. Hence the theft, staged with Blackwood's assistance, to recover the proofs and sell the harp privately." Blackwood whined, "I only provided the case and a place to work. He planned it all." Hargrove made a sudden lunge toward the harp as though to smash it, but Holmes was quicker. In an instant, he had seized the instrument and stepped back. "A fine performance, Professor, but the symphony ends here." At a signal from Holmes, two constables, who had been waiting in the alley, entered and took the men into custody. Hargrove went silently, his head bowed. Blackwood protested volubly, but to no avail. As the prisoners were led away, Holmes ran his fingers lightly across the harp strings. A pure, haunting phrase rang out, the same lament Miss O'Connor had played at the concert. For a moment, even the constables paused to listen. "A beautiful instrument," Holmes said softly, "whatever its true age. It deserves better than to be the tool of fraud." He wrapped it carefully in the baize cloth. "Come, Watson, we have a lady to reassure, and a relic, however composite, to restore." It was 2 days later, upon a clearer afternoon when the sun struggled through the London haze, that the affair of the Emerald Harp reached its quiet conclusion in our sitting room at Baker Street. Miss Eibelin O'Connor sat by the fire, the harp once more before her, its strings gleaming softly in the light. Professor Hargrove and Silas Blackwood had been taken before the magistrates. The forged documents were in the hands of the authorities, and the American collector, warned in time, had withdrawn his offer. The assistants, mere hirelings, had turned Queen's evidence. Holmes lounged in his armchair, filling his pipe with the dark shag that he kept in the Persian slipper. "You owe us a full explanation, Holmes," I said, settling opposite him. "Though much is clear, the precise manner of the theft still puzzles me." He smiled lazily. "It is simplicity itself, Watson, once the motives are understood. Hargrove, desiring both profit and the preservation of his scholarly reputation, feared that closer examination, perhaps by Dublin experts, would reveal his restorations for what they were. When Miss O'Connor announced her London recital, he saw an opportunity. He anonymously purchased the display case through Blackwood, ensuring it was fitted with a lock to which he possessed a duplicate key. During the interval, while attention was upon the refreshment rooms, he slipped backstage, used the duplicate to open the case, and removed the harp. The clockwork device, previously concealed, was then set to produce the later ghostly strains, both to suggest supernatural agency and to provide himself an alibi, for he was seen in the auditorium at midnight. The harp was conveyed to Blackwood's shop in a violin case, one of many such transactions that raised no remark in that quarter. The fairy note and emerald were sent to mislead us toward nationalist or superstitious channels, while the Hyde Park decoy wasted further time. Miss O'Connor spoke softly. "And the compartment? Did he truly believe my brother's old letters remained?" "Partly," Holmes replied. "But chiefly he sought the receipts and sketches he himself had placed there years ago, when he returned the restored harp to your father. Careless of him to leave such evidence, but forgers are often vain. They like to keep records of their cleverness." She touched the pillar gently. "Then this is no relic of Brian Boru, but a thing of many ages, old wood, new gems, modern wire." "Yet still beautiful," Holmes observed, "and still capable of true music. Its value lies not in centuries, madam, but in the hands that play it, and the hearts that hear it. Many so-called ancient treasures are composite. Few are loved as yours has been." Miss O'Connor's eyes filled with tears, but she smiled. "My family's pride is not diminished. We shall keep it, play it, and let the legend stand, for legends too have their worth." She rose and at Holmes's nod drew her fingers across the strings. A soft air filled the room, an old Gaelic melody of parting, tender and wistful. When the last note died away, she thanked us with quiet dignity and departed, the harp carefully wrapped in its cloth. Holmes watched the door close, then turned to me with a chuckle. "A pleasant coda, Watson. The criminal classes provide us with drama, but music, true music, supplies the resolution." I took up my pen, "and the public shall hear the tale." "In due course," he said, stretching like a cat, though perhaps with the fairy element somewhat subdued. "The age prefers its wonders explained." Outside, the bells of St. Marylebone chimed the hour, and the fog began to lift, as though even London itself acknowledged that another mystery had been gently laid to rest.